My father, Arthur, was a man built of silence. It wasn't the cold, empty silence that chills a room, but a dense, thoughtful quiet that felt more like a presence than an absence. While my mother was the melody of our household, a constant stream of stories and laughter, my father was the deep, resonant bass line that you could feel in your bones. He was the anchor. He communicated in subtle shifts of weight, and the way he'd look up from his newspaper just as you entered the room, and the gentle, callous pressure of his hand on your shoulder that said everything that needed to be said. His silence was his language, and for 20 years, I believed I was fluent. This quiet love was woven into the fabric of my childhood. I remember him spending an entire Saturday building a bookshelf for me, the only sounds being the scrape of sandpaper and the precise tap of his hammer. He never said, "I'm doing this because I love you," but the perfectly level shelf that held my favorite stories screamed it. He taught me how to ride a bike, not with instructions, but by running alongside me, his steadying hand on the seat, his quiet panting the only encouragement I needed. His actions were his sonnets. His efforts were his declarations. He showed his love. He didn't speak it. And in our bustling, noisy family, his silent devotion was the most constant and reliable force I ever knew. Our home was a symphony of the ordinary. The clatter of pans from the kitchen, the drone of the television in the evening, my sister's argument on the phone, my own music playing too loud for my bedroom. It was a life painted in bright, loud colors. And through it all, Arthur was a calm center, the eye of our familial hurricane. He would sit in his worn leather armchair, a silent observer to the chaos, a faint, knowing smile playing on his lips. His presence was so foundational, so utterly dependable, that I took it for granted. It was like the air I breathe, essential, life-giving, but completely invisible until it started to run out. The transition was jarring. The familiar, comfortable silence of our home was replaced by the sterile, forced quiet of a hospital room, punctuated by the rhythmic, artificial beep of machines. His silence was different here. It was no longer a choice, a sign of his thoughtful nature, but something fragile, something imposed upon him by illness. The man who was an anchor was now adrift in a sea of white sheets and antiseptic smells. The quiet strength in his hands was gone, replaced by the thinness of his skin and the blue veins that traced paths up his arms. The silence in that room was heavy, suffocating, and for the first time it felt like a barrier between us. In those final days, I sat by his bedside, a desperate student trying to cram a lifetime of lessons. The beeping of the heart monitor became the new rhythm of our lives, a cruel metronome counting down our remaining moments. I talked to him, filling the sterile air with memories, with questions, with all the things I suddenly realized I'd never asked. His eyes, sometimes clear, sometimes clouded, would follow me around the room. In that deafening quiet, I felt an overwhelming urgency, a sense that the language I thought I knew was incomplete. I had to understand, because I knew with a certainty that chilled me to my core that his greatest secret was hidden in the one place I'd never looked: his silence.
The air in that room was a thief, stealing sound, stealing warmth, stealing the very years from my father's face. Each beep of the heart monitor was a slow, deliberate countdown, a rhythm that had replaced the steady beat of our quiet life. I sat by his bed, holding a hand that felt like a fragile map of his life, its veins and wrinkles, the roads he'd traveled. He stirred, his eyes, clouded with pain and medication, struggled to find me. His lips parted, but only a dry whisper escaped. He gestured with a trembling finger, a weak, desperate motion for me to lean closer. I brought my ear to his mouth, the sterile scent of the hospital mixing with the faint, familiar smell of the man who raised me. The world shrank to the space between his last breaths and my listening ear. His voice was a ghost, a thread of sound so thin I feared it would snap. "I need to tell you," he rasped, each word an immense effort. "I'm sorry for the silence." I thought he meant the years of unspoken feelings, the emotional chasm that had always existed between us. I was about to tell him it was okay, that I understood, but he shook his head, a barely perceptible movement against the pillow. A single tear traced a path down his weathered cheek. He took a rattling breath, gathering the last of his strength for the words that would detonate my world. You are my son," he whispered, his grip tightening on my hand, "but I am not your father." The words didn't register at first. They were just sounds, disconnected from reality, a delirious rambling from a dying man. But then I saw the clarity in his eyes, a profound, heartbreaking lucidity. It was the truest thing he had ever said to me. He saw the confusion, the denial warring on my face, and he pushed on, his story tumbling out in fragmented pieces. He spoke of another time, a life before me filled with laughter and a friendship that ran deeper than blood. He spoke of a man and a woman, David and Sarah. My name for them, he said, would have been uncle and aunt. They were his everything, a trio bound by shared dreams and inseparable joy. He described them with a love so vivid, it felt like a memory I should have had. He painted a picture of their small apartment, the sound of their laughter echoing off the walls, the way they planned for a future that included him always. And then he spoke of a baby, a child they had waited for, a boy they had already named before he was even born. The confession came with the shuddering finality of a collapsing building. A rainy night, a winding road, a patch of black ice. He wasn't with them by a fluke, a last-minute decision to stay behind and fix a leaky pipe. He was the one who got the call, the one who arrived at the scene of twisted metal and shattered glass. And in the deafening silence that followed the sirens, he heard a sound. A cry. From the back seat of the wreckage, miraculously shielded from the impact, was their baby. Me. In that moment of absolute horror, standing on the precipice of his own grief, he made a promise. A silent vow to the ghosts of his best friends under the cold, indifferent rain. He would not let me become a ward of the state, a footnote in a tragedy. He would raise me as his own. My entire life, every memory, every quiet dinner, every awkward conversation was instantly recontextualized. His silence wasn't a wall, it was a sanctuary. It was the immense, crushing weight of a secret he carried to protect me from an orphan's grief, to honor a promise made in the darkest hour of his life. The distance I had always perceived as a lack of affection was in fact the most profound act of love I could ever imagine. He wasn't just my father. He was my guardian, my savior, a man who sacrificed his own emotional transparency to give me a life of normalcy. As his breathing grew shallow, he looked at me, the truth finally unburdened. The love I felt for him didn't vanish, it transformed, expanding into something boundless and sacred, a love redefined by the ultimate sacrifice. The funeral was a blur of muted colors and quiet condolences. People spoke of my father's kindness, his steadfast nature, his quiet strength. They all knew Arthur, the man who raised me,
None of them knew the secret he carried, the truth that now echoed in the hollow spaces of our home. After the last guest had departed, I was left alone with that deafening silence. His final words weren't just a confession, they were a map. The attic, he had rasped, his grip on my hand surprisingly firm. Behind the old seer chest. A shoebox. It's for you. For days, I'd avoided it, afraid of what confirming his story would do to the memory I cherished. But the not knowing was a heavier ghost. So with a deep breath that did little to steady my hands, I pulled down the folding ladder and ascended into the dusty, forgotten past. The attic smelled of time itself, of old wood, forgotten paper, and insulation. Sunbeams, thick with dancing dust motes, cut through the gloom from a single grimy window. I navigated a maze of holiday decorations and furniture shrouded in white sheets, ghosts of a life I thought I knew. There in the far corner sat the cedar chest just as he'd described, and tucked behind it, almost invisible in the shadows, was a simple, worn cardboard shoebox, its corner softened with age. It felt impossibly heavy in my hands, not from its physical weight, but from the gravity of the life it contained. For a long moment, I just stood there, holding this fragile vessel of truth, my own history sealed away by the man who had protected me from it. Lifting the lid felt like a transgression. The first thing I saw was a stack of photographs, their colors faded to a nostalgic sepia tone. A young man and woman, their faces radiant with a joy so pure it felt like a memory I should have had. They were laughing, holding each other, standing in front of a small blue house I'd never seen. And in several photos, there was my father, younger, his smile wider and more unguarded than I ever known it. He wasn't a father in these pictures. He was a friend, a brother. He stood beside the man, his arms slung over his shoulder, the two of them looking invincible. I stared at the woman's eyes, searching for a trace of my own reflection, a hint of familiarity in the curve of her smile. Beneath the photos was a bundle of letters tied with a simple string. The handwriting was a mix of a flowing, elegant script and the more bolder and angular one. They were letters between my father and them, David and Sarah. I carefully untied the string and read snippets, my heart pounding with each word. They spoke of shared dreams, of building a future, of my father being named Godfather. "You're more than a friend, Arthur," one letter from David read. "You're the brother I chose." They painted a picture of a bond so profound, a friendship so deep that it transcended simple definition. This wasn't just a story he told me, it was a life he had lived, a promise he had silently kept. At the very bottom of the box lay a single yellowed newspaper clipping, folded into a neat square. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. The headline was stark, brutal in its simplicity. Local couple killed in fiery head-on collision. The date, October 12th, 1994. My birthday. It detailed the accident on a rain-slicked country road, identifying the victims as David and Sarah Peterson. My breath caught in my throat as I read the final paragraph. The couple's 1-month-old son, the sole occupant of the back seat, was discovered by first responders miraculously unharmed. He is currently in the care of a close family friend. The confession on his deathbed was the emotional tremor. This was the factual earthquake that brought the entire structure of my life crashing down around me. Beneath the yellowed newspaper clippings, my fingers brushed against something solid and leather-bound. I pulled it out. It was a sketchbook, its cover worn smooth at the edges from use. I didn't understand. Arthur, the man who raised me, was a man of numbers and routine. A creature of logic and practicality. He fixed leaky faucets and balanced checkbooks. He didn't draw. Yet, as I opened it, the pages revealed a talent that was anything but amateur. Charcoal portraits so vivid they seemed to breathe. Architectural sketches with impossible detail. Landscapes that pulsed with a life I had never seen him acknowledge. This wasn't a hobby. It was a passion. It was a language he spoke fluently, but one he had never, not once, spoken to me. Flipping through the pages was like touring a world he had kept locked away. There were detailed drawings of the Eiffel Tower, the Colosseum in Rome, the bustling streets of a city I recognized as Tokyo. These weren't copies from photographs. They were filled with notes on light, shadow, and perspective, the work of someone planning to be there. Tucked into a back pocket of the sketchbook was a folded, crisp envelope, an acceptance letter. Not just to any school, but to one of the most prestigious art institutes in the country, dated just a few months before the accident, before me. It was a formal invitation to a completely different life, a future painted in brilliant colors, a path he was on the very brink of taking, a path that would have led him thousands of miles away from the small town where he would ultimately raise a child that wasn't his. The dates aligned with a chilling, heartbreaking precision. The date on the acceptance letter, the planned start of his new life, was just weeks after the date on the newspaper clipping detailing the fatal crash. The choice he faced was suddenly laid bare before me. No longer an abstract concept, but a tangible, brutal decision. He stood at a crossroads with two paths. One led to Paris, to art, to his own dreams. The other led to a crib, to sleepless nights, to me. He chose me. It's a choice that defines a lifetime, a quiet act of heroism that often goes unnoticed. If this story is resonating with you, if you've ever witnessed or made a sacrifice for love, take a moment to hit that like button and let me know in the comments what that has meant in your own life. It was a choice between the life he wanted and the life I needed. My search through the box continued, each discovery adding another layer to the man I thought I knew. I found a small velvet pouch filled with foreign coins collected for journeys never taken. There were rolled-up blueprints for a small woodworking studio he dreamed of building, complete with a skylight for optimum morning lights. I found a travel journal, its first few pages filled with his elegant script detailing his plans for a 1-year-long trip through Europe. The rest of the book hauntingly blank. Letters from friends who had moved away, asking when he was going to join them, their words full of shared excitement for a future that never came to be. It wasn't a single dream he had set aside. It was an entire constellation of possibilities, a whole universe of a different Arthur extinguished in a single, selfless act of love. And in that moment, my entire childhood was reframed. The quiet stability, the predictability I had sometimes mistaken for a lack of ambition was not a default setting. It was a deliberate, costly construction. Every single ordinary day we had together was the result of an extraordinary sacrifice. The steady job he kept but clearly disliked, the modest home he never left, the simple routines we followed, they weren't signs of a man with small dreams. They were the walls of a fortress he built around me, protecting me from the chaos of the world. And the price of the materials was every dream he had for himself. He didn't just give up a career, he gave up who he was meant to be, so that I could have a chance to become who I am.
It's a strange and disorienting feeling, like watching a film of your own life for the second time, but with the director's commentary turned on. Suddenly, every scene has a hidden layer of meaning. I remember being 12, furious with him because he wouldn't let me go to a summer camp out of state. I saw it as him being controlling, overprotective. I yelled, I slammed doors. I saw his quiet refusal as a lack of trust. Now, I see the truth. It wasn't about trust. It was about fear. The fear of letting the only thing he had left in the world go too far from his sight. A fear born from a tragedy I never even knew had shaped my entire existence. The puzzle pieces of his career started clicking into place with a painful clarity. The promotion he turned down in Chicago, the one that would have doubled his salary but required us to move. I remember my teenage self seeing it as a lack of ambition, a sign that he was content with mediocrity. How wrong I was. It wasn't a rejection of success. It was a preservation of stability. He was keeping me in the same school, with the same friends, in the only home I'd ever known. He was anchoring my world at the cost of his own, ensuring that the ground beneath my feet was solid, even if it meant his own horizons would forever remain limited. And the silence. There was so much silence. Those long evenings when he would just sit in his armchair, staring out the window for hours. I used to think he was disappointed in me, or just lost in a sadness I couldn't penetrate. But it wasn't disappointment. It was the crushing weight of his promise. He was carrying the memory of my parents, the burden of his secret, and the silent grief for the life he gave up. He wasn't pushing me away. He was wrestling with ghosts I didn't know existed, shielding me from a storm that raged inside him every single day. His quiet was not emptiness. It was a fortress he built to protect my peace. I think about the dusty box of charcoal pencils I found in the attic once, the ones he told me were just from a long time ago. I remember seeing him sketch on napkins at diners, his hand moving with a forgotten grace. I saw it as a simple hobby, a passing distraction. But it was more than that. It was the echo of a soul that was born to create, a passion he had to meticulously pack away. He traded his canvas for spreadsheets, his pigments for paychecks, all to paint a future for me. He sacrificed his art only to turn my life into his singular, most profound masterpiece, a work of love crafted over 2 decades. What does it mean to be a father? I used to think it was about biology, a simple fact of lineage. Arthur taught me it has nothing to do with blood and everything to do with choice. He chose me. Every single day, he woke up and chose to be my father. Every dream he deferred, every opportunity he declined, every silent, lonely night, it was all part of that continuous, unwavering choice. The man I knew wasn't just the man who raised me. He was the architect of my safety, the silent guardian of my happiness, and the living embodiment of a love so profound it willingly erased itself for the sake of another. He wasn't my biological father, but he was the truest father a son could ever know. The weight of Arthur's sacrifice had settled, but it left a new kind of void, a question mark that pulsed with a life of its own. If he wasn't my father, then who was? The box, once a container of his hidden past, now held the key to mine. Tucked beneath his sketches was a folded, brittle document, my original birth certificate. It was more than a piece of paper. It was a ghost. It held a name I'd never heard, Eleanor, and an address in a part of the city I'd never been to. For the first time, my mother had a name. The quest was no longer about understanding the man who raised me, but about finding the woman who gave me life. It felt like a monumental betrayal to Arthur's memory. Yet I knew, somehow, that this was the final chapter of the story he had started. The search felt like trying to grasp smoke. The name was common, the address a vacant lot for over 30 years. Every public record search, every digital breadcrumb led to a dead end. Days turned into weeks of staring at a screen, feeling an immense sense of guilt and obsession. I was chasing a phantom, a whisper from a life I was never meant to know. I imagined Arthur silently watching me and wondered if this would hurt him. But then a new feeling emerged. This wasn't about replacing him, it was about honoring him. To understand the true depth of his gift, I had to understand what and who had been lost. My search was no longer for myself alone. It was to complete the circle of his selfless act. The breakthrough came from an old city directory, a digitized archive from a local library. Eleanor had a sister listed at the same address, a different last name, a marriage. One name led to another, a digital daisy chain that finally ended at a single current phone number. My hand trembled as I held my phone, the number glowing on the screen. For an hour, I just stared at it, a gateway to an alternate reality. What could I possibly say? How do you call a stranger and potentially detonate their entire world? With a deep breath that did nothing to calm my racing heart, I pressed the call button. A woman's voice, cautious and kind, answered. And with faltering words, I explained that I was looking for a woman named Eleanor, who I believed was my mother.
There was a long, heavy silence, and then a single whispered word. Where? We met in a quiet, sunlit cafe. She looked at me from across the table, her eyes scanning my face with an unnerving intensity. Her name was Margaret, and in the lines around her eyes, I saw a faint echo of my own. Then she saw it too. Her breath hitched, and her eyes filled with tears. You have her smile, she whispered, and with that, the dam of 30 years of silence broke. She pulled a worn, leather wallet from her purse and laid out a handful of faded, creased photographs. And there she was, Eleanor, my mother, laughing, vibrant, full of life, and next to her, a man with a kind face and his arm around her. My father. They weren't just names anymore, they were real. Margaret spoke for an hour, her voice thick with memories, painting a picture of their love, their dreams, and the sudden tragic car accident that had erased them from the world. In her story, I finally understood everything. After the accident, the family was in chaos. In the confusion, I, a newborn infant, had been lost in the system. They searched, but with no records to follow, they eventually had to accept that I was gone, lost along with my parents. My existence had become a painful family myth, a ghost haunting their history. Arthur hadn't just saved me from an uncertain fate in an orphanage, he had unknowingly become a custodian of my entire identity. He had built a wall around my life, not to hide me from the world, but to protect the fragile legacy of the family I never knew. His quiet, solitary life had been a silent vigil preserving a bridge to my past. He hadn't just given me a future, he had saved my history, holding it safely until the day I was strong enough to cross that bridge myself.
Leaving my aunt's house, I felt a profound sense of duality. The drive home was silent. The hum of the engine a backdrop to the vivid stories of the parents who gave me my eyes, my name. They weren't ghosts anymore. They were real people who loved, who faced an impossible choice, and who entrusted their entire world to a friend. It wasn't a story of abandonment, but a final, heartbreaking act of protection. The world outside seemed unchanged, but I was fundamentally altered. My reflection in the glass was no longer just my own. It was a mosaic I was only now beginning to understand. I now have two inheritances, a dual heritage that doesn't conflict, but completes. On one side, the parents who gave me life, a biological fact, a legacy of love and tragedy written in my genes. Theirs is a story of what could have been. And then there's Arthur, the man who didn't give me life, but who gave me a life. He was the one who bandaged my knees, sat through terrible school plays, and taught me how to be a good man through his quiet, unwavering example. He built a fortress of normalcy and love around me, brick by painful, secret brick. They gave me my start. He ensured I had a journey. The true legacy Arthur left wasn't the secret and the box. The secret was simply the burden he chose to carry so I wouldn't have to. His real legacy is etched into every ordinary memory. It's in the patience he showed when I struggled, the pride in his eyes at my graduation, the steadfast presence I took for granted. Every decision he made, every quiet sigh I now understand, it was all an act of radical, sacrificial love. He absorbed a lifetime of pain and fear, and in its place, he gave me a childhood. The greatest gift he gave me wasn't his name. It was a life where I never had to question it. I no longer feel like a puzzle with the missing piece. I was never incomplete, just unaware of the full picture. I am not solely the son of Arthur, nor the lost child of two people I never met. I am both. I am the product of their tragedy and his triumph, the living proof of a promise kept across decades. My identity isn't fractured, it's fortified, built on two foundations, one of blood and one of choice. And the foundation of choice, the one Arthur built, held me up my entire life. My purpose is now clear, to live a life worthy of all three, to carry their stories forward
as one. This journey didn't provide simple answers. It gave me a more profound truth. Family isn't just about the blood in our veins, but the love poured into our lives. It's about sacrifices made in silence and promises kept in the dark. Arthur's story and my parents' story is now my story, and I will spend my life honoring it. The greatest legacies aren't carved in stone. They're woven into the lives we touch.
If you believe these stories of profound human connection deserve to be heard, subscribe to this channel and join us for our next investigation into the hidden histories that shape us all.